Back to the afternoon session of the Board of County Commissioners regular meeting. It's still June 10th, 2025. We start off with our number 9 item on our agenda, our public works item, which is a discussion and order in the matter of authorizing the county administrator to enter into a lease agreement with the Department of State Lands for the North Jetty property. And with us for the presentation and explanation is Mr. Brett Henry, our Parks Division Manager. Welcome, sir.
Hello. Good afternoon. All right, make sure ready to advance the slides. Okay. So, for the record, again, my name is Brett Henry. I'm the Parks Division Manager here at Lane County. And it's my pleasure to bring this lease agreement before you for the North Jetty property over in Florence. So we're going to start with looking at the agenda here. What the presentation is going to cover. We'll begin with looking at the property, a good description of the property, its size, where it's located, ownership, and we'll talk about a maintenance agreement that Lane County has had in place for about 6 years. And then we'll go into how this lease agreement fits the board goals as well as the county park goals, looking at our master plan. And then we'll talk about some of the financial and resource considerations. How much is it going to cost to operate and maintain, and is this a good investment? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then last step is just to, again, reiterate the board order. And then we'll, moving forward, give some regular updates to the commissioners as if the particular lease is executed. So the purpose of this board meeting is to authorize the county administrator to enter into a long-term 30-year lease with the Department of State Lands for the North Jetty property. Hi there. Sorry. North Jetty Park is located again in Florence, and it's made up of 2 parcels. It's 226 acres. Again, it's owned by Department of State Lands, and it's zoned Parks and Rec Dune, so it has a good zoning designation for us acquiring a lease. So looking at the maintenance agreement, it started in 2019, so and it actually expires at the end of this month, so this year. And so obviously now it's timely to consider, do we enter into a long-term lease? And, this hasn't been taken lightly. We've thought about it for a while, and the reason why we wanted to do the maintenance agreement is we wanted to see, what are the issues going to be, what's it going to cost, and what are the resources needed to get cost recovery. So we've been able to make a number of site improvements out there. As you can see, potholes have been filled. We're picking up litter, extra security, and the locals have really noticed that. As you can see, and I believe one of the surveys is in your packet. But obviously, I think that the public has really appreciated the county taking it over, and it's in a much better shape. So there are 2 parking areas. There's the main dive lot, which is larger, and the main beach access lot, which is larger, and the smaller dive lot. And if you've ever been out there, you'll notice that there's a ginormous, largest pothole I've ever seen. It's Golden Moon Crater, essentially. So
I thought that was Clearwalk Lake.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we have hired an engineer to take a look at it, and we're about 35% through the design plan. And so what we're going to do is we're going to reconstruct not only that dive lot, but also the Moon Crater lot. And so on top of that, we're going to add public restrooms and added security lighting as well. So these investments are going to be made with the 2022 local option levy, and we're looking at a little over 2 million in investments that we're going to put into the property. So thinking about on this lease, and does it align with the board's goals, the county's goals, and park's goals? I could have listed more, but I wanted to really look at the strategic priority number 3 within the county's strategic plan. And that's really, the maintenance and investment of resilient infrastructure. And, and I think it's been a bit of a change since I became park manager. We haven't taken on additional property, been very careful about thinking about making sure that we have cost recovery for all our services, and we want to look into the future and make sure that we're able to obviously get through a lot of this deferred maintenance backlog that we're working on now. So additionally, the 2018 Parks and Open Space Master Plan lists 2 goals. The first one's connect, and again, we want to make sure that we're connecting the public with water. Water access is really important, and this North Jetty is one of 3 main water access points in Florence. So we want to make sure that, again, that we're providing this access, but doing so in an accessible way. And then goal number 5, protect resources. I think it's important to take a look at not only our cultural resources, but our natural resources. And we do have some plans for looking at the dunes and doing some restoration there as well on the property. So this is a real gem, and I would say that compared to what a lot of people have thought, and it really pushed me to move forward with the lease, but I've been very hesitant to do so, and that's mainly because I want to be sure that we can get cost recovery. And so looking at the costs, it averages about $50,000 to $55,000 a year to operate, and I've been able to get as much data as possible through car counting that's more current, as well as back when Oregon State Parks had a maintenance agreement with DSL. They gave me some of their data that goes back into 2019, and it looks like we'll be able to generate anywhere from 90,000 to 120,000. So that should be able to make up for any of the maintenance costs we have out there. We know we're making a significant investment to start with, but we do believe if we keep up with those parking lots and continue to maintain them, slurry seal, crack seal, and so forth, that they'll remain in good shape for a long time. So the plan really is to, if this lease is executed, we want to make the capital investments first. And those won't be complete until we estimate 2027. And at that point, we want to eventually charge parking fees. But what we'll do is there'll be some more public process. We've had some. And we want to make sure, though, that revenue that's generated from those parking fees goes back into the park. And so, obviously, that's really important. So, Lane County Parks cannot take it over if we do not charge parking fees. And so, again, getting cost recovery, and we will probably post and then wait 12 to 18 months before we actually ticket. So that way, there can be more information out there for the public, as well as some more public process, so people understand what we're doing, and then we'll start issuing warnings and citations. But that's the kind of the general plan of how we want to move forward. And so, before you is this board order. Again, it authorizes the county administrator to sign the lease. And do want to mention that that after, we're putting the $2 million into the property, for mainly the parking lot upgrades, we're going to look at other potential capital investments into the future, potentially with the levy renewal, depending on if the public, again, is still in favor of an elevated boardwalk and improved access to the beach. So that's an important project that we're looking forward to in the future. But in general, with this board order, it is an important step for Lane County Parks. And taking on this property, I know is a big responsibility, and I certainly have not taken this lightly. And I welcome your comments, and looking forward. We are in no hurry of getting into the lease, but if you guys are willing to allow us to execute the lease, we will start out there. So not much is changing because, as I said earlier, there was a maintenance agreement, but now this just really locks us in for the next 30 years. So that's a commitment that we have to make. And so just welcome any discussion you guys may have. And again, next steps will be looking at having regular sessions with the board, updating you on the progress of North Jetty, as we move through, make the investments, and move towards charging parking.
Great. Well, thank you for being so methodical and thinking it through and patient. They always say a difference between a great deal and a good deal of real estate is time. So, yeah, good for you. Any questions for Brett from the board? Vice Chair.
I want to say it's very exciting. Appreciated our time out there and going through it and explaining your plans, and you've showed good discretion and caution, so that builds a lot of trust in a decision like this. So it's really appreciated, Brett. Thank you.
Oh, sure, yeah, and I think it's important that all the commissioners understand the parks that are in their district and some of the future plans that we have. So anytime. Yeah.
All right. Commissioner Buck, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'll just say, I'm very supportive. It makes, for me, what makes the most sense as part of this agreement is that if we're going to invest millions of dollars into the property, that we have some longer term ownership and or this lease to ensure that reinvestment is recouped over time on behalf of residents. So this makes sense to me largely because of that.
When we first saw this, thank you, Chair. When we first saw this presented, what was it, 7 years ago now, perhaps?
Yeah, it was back in 2019.
Yeah.
Charlie Conrad.
Right, it was Charlie
presenting to
Conrad.
me. Yeah.
Rep. Conrad. It seemed like a easy decision to make at the time, because it adds very valuable, or really one of the most valuable spots in Lane County, right on the North Jetty where the Siuslaw goes in, and one of the most vulnerable spots also. And the state didn't seem to want to take care of it.
Right.
I'm using that term. Mm-hmm. And it seemed that it was appropriate for the county. I guess I need to make certain that the investment that we're putting into it is something that isn't going to come out of somebody's pocket, that ultimately it'll be paying for itself. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's why I'm talking about charging the parking fees.
Yes.
And taking a broader look at our parking fees, we do want to start charging less parking fees. Obviously all of our parks are not worth $5 a day. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to have to depend on parking fees at a lot of our parks. But for this particular park, you go out there on any summer day and you'll see just, parks or people parked on top of each other essentially, mm-hmm. right? So we understand that we could get that cost recovery through the parking fees. And that's why I wanted to wait and was kind of putting it off and really wanted to make sure that we weren't gonna have, issues, like they've had in the past. They've had some issues with, folks in the evening, some disturbances and so forth. But we made sure that, the local sheriff's been out there and working with them closely, and, really haven't been incidents out there since we've taken it over.
And I think, the parking lot there, of course, it needs work, but it's very parkable. And when you go out there in the summer, you see places from all over America, which tells me that people are prepared to invest in the things that we take for granted. I buy parking passes. I buy them for my entire family and for us. So I don't pay when I go there, or I won't ever pay. And the other thing that's really important for us to realize is that for Lane County residents who have certain vulnerabilities, that we do have parking passes available through a process either reduced or free parking passes.
Right.
Which makes it even more accessible for Lane County Lane County residents at ultimately a reduced price, while we are maximizing our maximizing what other people pay. When I go to Golden Gate Park, I gladly pay, and I know that none of that goes to the state of Oregon. So I think it's a matter of we have a wonderful amenity there. If you look at it, you look at all the pictures we have online, it just is a destination. And so I remain as enthusiastic about it as I was 7 years ago, particularly understanding that it's going to be something that we really do ultimately get a balance as far as the cost of maintaining the park. You say it's $40,000 to $50,000 a year.
51,000, 50 to
51,000.
55,000.
And then whatever capital improvements go into that, but
About 2.2 million capital improvements.
over time.
Taken from the levy.
From the levy.
Well, good. I think we seem to have pretty good support from the board on this, and I'm still with it. I'm still as excited as I was then, because it really is a great destination point, and not just for people who live here, but for people who are driving up and down the coast, people who are coming here from overseas. My sister works for Travel Lane County, and she says that the Oregon coast, particularly the Lane County coast, is a very popular destination for people traveling from overseas. Mm-hmm. And if you drive from up the Lane County coast, it's one of the only places that you actually drive on Highway 101, actually on the ocean. So it's a part of the Lane County's job.
Great drive.
Well, I could go on and on, but I shan't. Thanks.
Any other comments for Brett? All right, great. We have an order before us, order number 25061013. I'm looking for a motion.
Chair, I move to approve order 25061013 in the matter of authorizing the county administrator to enter into a lease agreement with the Department of State Lands for the North Jetty property.
A second.
I'll second.
Great. We have a motion by Vice Chair and seconded by Commissioner Buck on board order 25061013. Is there any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, let's call for the vote. All those in favor signify with an aye. Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Great. Brett, thank you very much. We're looking forward to Massive Crater being renamed.
Moon Crater.
That was my personal parking spot. My whole car fits in it.
The submarine.
It is great kayaking.
Thanks again, Brett. Have a great day.
Thanks, Brett.
Oh my gosh, and the jokes continue. All right, our next item on our agenda is number 10, our Health and Human Services item. It's a report on our homelessness programming update, and it looks like Mr. James Ewell, the Homelessness and Community Action Manager, Maria Cortez, our Senior Program Services Coordinator, and did Kate Budd slip out? Oh, no, there she is still. And Kate Budd is here, so whoever wants to take charge and move ahead, go ahead, please.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having us here. This is part of the quarterly Human Service Division Homeless Response System update that the board has requested. Today we're going to be covering what we know currently of the fiscal year upcoming fiscal year's funding forecast. I'm sure everyone in this room is aware it's ever changing, so this is what we know as of today. And I'm going to go over the 2025 point in time or PIT count results and talk a little bit more in detail about what those numbers represent and trends that we've been seeing. And then Maria's going to give an update on the MLK Commons. We recently were able to get 4 years worth of data of the MLK Commons, and so we've seen some interesting information come out of that we want to share. And then Maria's also going to touch on the Lazy Days project, which is a partnership with Homes for Good in Lane County to help provide housing to folks that survived the Holiday Farm fire of 2020. Won't say that 5 times fast. I do want to mention, I know many of you have been receiving input from constituents regarding the NAV Center. We're excited to come back and talk to you all on a work session on July 8th to address some of those concerns and talk about ways that it's being mitigated. I'm not going to touch on the NAV Center in this presentation because of that work session that's coming up. So in regards to our upcoming fiscal year and the funding forecast, there's some things we know right now, some things that are pending, and unfortunately it's more of things that are pending than we know definitively. What we do know currently largely is related to our state funding. So we have confirmed the 2025-2027 master grant agreement with the state. That master grant agreement is for a total of $12.9 million. Within that, there's state and federal funds. Roughly 60% of the master grant agreement is state funding, which has been confirmed that we are to receive. The unknown amount within the master grant agreement is that federal funding, that other 40%. And so, along with much of the federal funding, it remains an unknown. On a local level, Lane County, City of Eugene, City of Springfield have all committed to maintaining stable funding for the Human Services Commission funding for the upcoming fiscal year. Similarly, on the federal level, the majority of federal funding that flows through Lane County in the federal budget, the proposed federal budget, it has either been eliminated or we would be facing notable policy changes within that budget. An example of that is the federal budget would propose moving away from continuums of care or COC funding models, and instead the funding would go through what's called the Emergency Solutions Grant Funding, or ESG, which would route it then through the state rather through the regional entities of the continuums of care. Additionally, there is mention of limiting assistance to up to 24 months. Which would have an effect on programs such as permanent supportive housing, like Maria will talk about. And so there's just, as I've been saying throughout this, just a lot of unknowns on a federal level. And so, we wait along with you all, along with our providers, just on a day-to-day basis to see what's going to transpire there. Up until a few weeks ago, I think we were, very hopeful that the Governor Kotek's executive order funding, the all-in funding, was at minimum going to sustain the projects that we have created through all-in over the last few years. We have been starting to hear that certain state legislatures are feeling that specifically for shelters, that funding should be living at a local level. And largely that is being influenced by Portland and Multnomah County, who have quite a bit of local money to fund shelters. Unfortunately, Lane County, the municipalities within, we don't have that same amount of funding. And so if we were to face a significant reduction in the all-in funding for shelter, it would be incredibly challenging for our county to maintain the shelter beds that we currently have.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Kate might know this, or this might be a separate question for either Steve Adams or Vanessa Cornwell, but has there been any discussion of working language into that is population-based? We often see legislation that rather than naming a particular city or county says for populations over or under X, this is in place to address that issue around shelter funding and local dollars. Do you know if there's been any discussion of making amendments to this
So there's been significant discussion regarding what they're calling a shelter framework.
Right.
And that shelter framework would begin fiscal year 27, so not this coming year, the next year. And within that framework, there is a proposal to take another look at the allocation equation that's used. And there's actually feedback that's being collected right now through Oregon Housing and Community Services to get, whether it's provider or funder or just general community input as to how the dollars ought to be allocated. And so for us, very much we encourage that the state look at point in time counts, the by name lists, as well as the McKinney-Vento data, which identifies the number of students who are unhoused and doubled up or couch surfing within the community. That would be as opposed to utilizing just a general poverty rate or a general rate of folks who are low income. And so that remains to be seen as to what the actual equation will be, but there is opportunities to provide feedback at this point for fiscal year 27.
Great, thank you.
And we also just today got up to speed on the OHCS budget. So the all-in shelter funding was a big question mark in the all-in shelter bill. They did pull that out of the bill. They wrapped it into the OHCS budget. It's about statewide 10 million less than we had heard it might be for the biennium, which for this legislative session is pretty good.
Pretty good.
But it will not sustain the current service levels that we have today. So that's just for folks' awareness. I think we have very little possibility of bumping that number up any further. We will likely be looking at having to do some restructuring within our system as a result of those budgetary what will result in reductions, but it's still pretty good compared to what we're seeing in some of the other budgets. Of that funding, the half is one time. Half is considered ongoing until 2034. So that, that's a 2027 problem, as Mr. Adams put it, but that's something for us to be aware of.
Great, thank you.
No, thank you, appreciate that. So yeah, as we continue to to move through kind of the unknowns, obviously we have providers that need to look out for their programs and their staff, and so we are continuing to move forward where we can. So the majority of our contracts have been going through the request for proposal or RFP process. Through that process and through the scoring committees that review those proposals, they are looking at things like history of that provider providing that specific service, whether or not if they have provided that service previously, if they've met or exceeded their outcomes, their experience with managing grant funding. All of those are factors that come into play by our scoring committee when they're reviewing proposals. We have been clear throughout the RFP process that there is not guaranteed funding, and so that's been language that's been in the RFP postings, just stating that awards will be granted based on available funding. And as we've been able to move to executing contracts where there still is funding unknown, that continues to be emphasized, that we will provide that funding if when it is available. For the contracts that we do know where the funding is known, we're moving forward with those. We are moving forward with contracts that are 1 year in length, but we're only doing a incremental portion of the funding at a time, just to ensure that there's successful transition of that programming, and that we're as we're continuing to right size our budget as we learn about the funding, that we're making sure that areas are being covered where necessary. So it's, I will just echo, I know it's a stressful time for many of us in the room and for our providers as we try to work through all of this stuff, but we're really partnering with them and kind of taking it day by day. Pivoting from the funding conversation to something that we do have known information about is the 2025 point in time counter PIT count, which I know our press release and our infographic was shared with you all previously. Just to give some background and context, the point in time count is a requirement of both HUD and OHCS. It is required that we conduct an annual count of people experiencing homelessness on a single night. and that needs to occur each January. This year's point-in-time count occurred on January 29th. Because of the YHDP or Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project funding that we currently have, we also had a special focus on counting youth experiencing homelessness. That was done both through our traditional methods as well as a in-person event at the Youth Era program in downtown Eugene. So we worked to host an event, had food, had raffles, had different ways of engaging youth to get them to come to that event to then be counted for the point in time. As you may remember, Lane County utilizes both our HMIS data as well as in-person interviewing through our street outreach team. So, our street outreach teams on a daily basis are going out across the county, engaging with folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And so through those relationships, and often those are folks that are not accessing services elsewhere. So through those relationships, our teams are able to then survey them for the point-in-time count. I think it's important also to note that we are one of the only communities across the nation that HUD has allowed us to utilize the methodology we use of so heavily relying on HMIS. And that's because of the robust HMIS system we have, and that we have so many providers participating in that system. So this year, of the 3,509 folks that were counted, 3,444 of those were already in the HMIS system, which is indicative of us having a very accurate count just using HMIS, and then being able to supplement it with those in-person interviews makes it even more robust. So again, we saw an increase in overall numbers of people experiencing homelessness in Lane County this year. We were up 14%. So the number does continue to grow. I think of note this year, there's a few things, but primarily January 29th happened to be a night that our severe weather shelters were open. So both the Egan Warming Centers as well as Casa Community Services hotel sheltering for families. Because of folks that likely, on a night that there wasn't those shelter options provided, we may not have been able to count them. But because of their interest in accessing shelters, we had an additional 500 beds of folks that we were then able to count. And so really, we think that gives us a more accurate count of who's experiencing homelessness because they may not have engaged in accessing the shelter or being surveyed if it wasn't a night that we were experiencing severe weather. As we look and see this increase in homelessness, and continue to see the scarcity of housing in our community, which I'm going to touch on a subsequent slide. Obviously the lack of available housing, among other factors in our community, is playing a role in increasing homelessness. We did see a decrease in unsheltered homelessness this year, down 4%. I think, definitely the having those warming shelters open that night, I think, played a role in that. But we've also just seen, I think, increased challenges in engaging with folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness since the pandemic because they're just more spread out. So at the height of the pandemic, when we were all being asked to shelter in place, that was also being extended to folks that were experiencing unsheltered homelessness, and so it was easier for our outreach teams to locate them and count them. And as we've moved farther away from the pandemic, we're just seeing the unsheltered individuals be scattered more across the country. Another piece to note is we did see an increase of the percentage of individuals who are chronically homeless and sheltered. That was an increase from 2020 to 24, from 25% to 46%. So as I noted, we have seen an increase in sheltered homeless numbers. An overall increase, but when you look at sheltered versus unsheltered, there's a more significant increase within shelter. I think it's important to highlight, through All In, we were able to increase the available shelter beds in Lane County significantly, which makes sense that we would then see increased shelter numbers within the PIT count. I think it's important to note, when the general public may sees this, they may not recognize the nuance of investing in shelters versus not actually seeing an overall reduction in what HUD considers literal homelessness, because although there's obvious benefits of being able to provide shelter to individuals experiencing homelessness, within the way HUD counts folks experiencing homelessness, that's not going to result in an overall decrease because they're still experiencing homelessness. But I think it is, it is just interesting to see that number increase significantly, especially since 2021. So this graphic, is used to kind of paint a picture of, where folks are within our homeless services system. So this is a snapshot of January 2025, and you can see that individuals within the system are those folks that are represented in HMIS that are enrolled in a program and are reporting experiencing homelessness. And then we have 1,039 new folks that are entering the system that month, and only 748 folks that are exiting. And so obviously, using this graphic as an example, to be able to see an increase in the outflow, you need to be able to turn the faucet on heavier so that you get more folks exiting. And to be able to do that, you really have to invest in the resources that are going to get folks out of the homeless services system. Programs like our diversion program, which I've spoken with you all about before, works also on that back end to help prevent folks from entering the system, as well as the homelessness prevention resources that we have in place. So as we look to ways to increase the outflow and factors that play a role in that, we're looking at things like rental vacancy rates. And so if you look between 2020 and 2025, you'll see that the Eugene Springfield metro area is significantly lower in the national average for rental vacancy units. A healthy vacancy rate is a measure that shows where the supply and the demand are met, and so that's the indication that you have a healthy vacancy rate or a healthy rental market. Eugene Springfield has not met that mark at all over the last 5 years, whereas the national average has been either at or above for that whole time. And when you look just on a state level and you compare other communities of similar size, Eugene and Springfield metro area is lower in comparison to those other communities. I think it's especially noticeable too when you look at multi-unit housing. And so, a 3-bedroom unit, the vacancy rate is incredibly low in Eugene Springfield area. So you think about the families that are experiencing homelessness and their inability to find housing that's going to meet the needs for households with children. So, obviously there are many factors that play into how we can increase that outflow from our system, but we really look towards vacancy rates as a large reason why we're not able to increase the outflow of that system. Any questions on that before we're going to pivot quite a bit? So
Can I just add one other contextual point, kind of going back to your very good reminder about the uncertainty around federal funding. The best intelligence we have is an interest in decreasing investment in rental assistance and energy assistance. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times when we are housing folks, if we can get rental assistance and utility assistance, we can put folks who are on a very low income, SSDI is like $1,500 a month, I think. Mm-hmm. So if you are on that extremely low income, your rent may exceed your monthly income. With rental assistance, we may be able to place someone in market rate housing in order to continue the flow of that system. When that funding declines, then we may actually see vacancy rates improve. Mm-hmm. But unless we see rents come down, we will see homelessness rates go up. So that's what we're up against here, and I know we've had some good conversations, Chair, about affordable housing being a term that we really can't use, and we've got to figure out how can we get more creative in housing options that maybe aren't just the traditional stick-built homes, because otherwise we're going to fall further and further behind as we see federal assistance decline.
Commissioner Farr, you had a question?
Well, let's keep talking about that, because what can we at Lane County do about it, about this much? What can you and HHS do about it? Even less. You know, I mean, the problem with housing isn't a county problem, it's a city's problem. And it's a discussion that we've had for years, since I got on the Eugene County City Council in 1995. How do we build less houses in Eugene? How do we build less? How do we maintain our urban growth boundaries so that we can't build more? You know, we're paying for it now. The years and years and years of what has been, and I say it out loud, a no growth demeanor in our community, and we're paying for it now because people want to live here. How many people are graduating from Sheldon High School tonight? Where are they going to live after they leave their families? You know, some of them want to stay here. Some of them need a front door. They're going to be adding to the pressure on more housing. So we can't do anything about it other than exercise whatever leverage we have with the cities. But the cities have got to pay attention, and they've got to make certain that we're doing every single thing we can, like I believe we're doing at the county. For the most part, they've got to do every single thing they can to alleviate this. James, you said it. Eve, you said it. It's housing, housing, housing. It's front doors. We don't have the front doors, and if we do have vouchers, people can't fill their voucher. If we do have subsidy funding for market rate housing, there's no market rate housing because every vacancy has 10 applicants. And you're lucky to get in. So once again, there's nothing we can do. Wringing our hands doesn't do any good. We have to really focus at all times on the cities. And when they hire a new city manager, make sure that city manager is focused on housing. Otherwise, we're going to be looking at this for years and years and years and years to come in Lane County.
Vice Chair.
Some of the cities, Commissioner Buck and I both have cities in our districts that are ready to build, and they're up against a housing moratorium.
And we can address that through MWMC and working with a partnership to get Cresswell, for instance, get a pipe down to Cresswell. Sometimes it's just a pipe.
Yeah, right. But I mean, yes, we do have cities that are willing to build and just unable to. Maybe this isn't the right time, but so Florence, Sayusla Outreach Services, I mean, they're taking a pretty good hit this go around. When I speak with Bob Teeter, how do I explain to him why he feels that SOS has taken a larger hit than, say, a nonprofit here in Eugene? I mean, their thought process is that they feel like these services are being directed more towards Eugene Hub, and because they're outside of the hub, that they're not getting the services. And it is a question, like, what do I tell Bob Teeter about his cuts? He's telling me up to 70% of some of his funding is being cut.
So we do have funding that is directed to Western Lane County, Eastern Lane County, and also Southern Lane County. And those are dedicated for those areas. And those dollars continue to often flow to SOS in that regard. Then there are other dollars that are not dedicated to certain areas of the county where, you know, we conduct a request for proposal and identify, you know, what the priorities are for the funding itself, and then go through that process. And unfortunately, with most of the dollars that we have done a request for proposal for, it's just fewer funds. And as a result, it means, for example, with our prevention programs, we had 11 applicants, which just indicates, you know, there's a high need and also a high interest to provide those types of services, and only 3 are receiving dollars. And so I can understand why any agency, SOS included, would feel like, you know, they're experiencing a loss of dollars. And unfortunately, it's just on some level supply and demand, and that we just don't have enough dollars to be able to go around. And after the request for proposal scoring is done, you know, there has to be winners, and then unfortunately there are those that just didn't score high enough to receive dollars. And so with any agency, I'll also offer, we're happy to take a look and share the feedback regarding the RFP and provide technical assistance around where they might be able to improve. And that's a key part of it too, is there are agencies that may struggle with RFPs, and then other agencies that are very, very high performers. And when the dollars are slim, it is those high performers that are funded.
James, I'm wondering, on that slide where you had rental vacancy rates on there, and I look down here at the asterisk, it says that the source is multifamily Northwest Apartment Reports. Is that a governmental-based agency? Is that a commercial?
Landlord association.
Pardon me?
It's a landlord association.
Oh, it's a landlord association. All right. Well, it's just kind of interesting because our direct experience in town, obviously the healthy vacancy rates are 5 to 7%, and Lane County so far is sitting at 3.56. Our experiences in the last year have been that rental rates have almost frozen. In fact, they've even retreated a little bit more, and the demand for single bedroom studio we used to have maybe units that would stay on ad 2-3 days and get filled, and now they're 2 months. So the demand has really cooled off in our experiences, and I'm just wondering why that doesn't translate in some of these data, because as I'm looking at 3.56, in my mind, those are units that are not being pursued, that are going to stay vacant because of either A, there's no demand, or the landlord is maybe charging enough, and we're at that kind of nexus where people are just fed up and can't pay anymore, and we're kind of at that crest of the hill, and we have to come down a little bit to kind of restart the process again. Any thoughts on that?
What I'll share is I appreciate this particular report because they come out quarterly, and I recognize that even month to month the vacancy rates, or even the experiences of landlords vary, and so even to present a vacancy rate for a year, there's a lot of variability there, and I'd be eager to see what their summer 2025 report looks like, because maybe there's a lag in what you're sharing, and we might see it rise. Or certainly, I know there are many different entities that report vacancy rates, and maybe the way that they're reporting just isn't getting an accurate pulse on what you're experiencing in Springfield. I can offer that these are focused on the urban area as opposed to Lane County as a whole. So as a result, it ought to be able to pulse out what you're describing, that we're not seeing it there.
I think some of the other considerations that maybe at play, certainly rental rates are a part of that. Can the population we're trying to house afford the market rate? Vouchers are already slim. And then some other pieces are depending on the background checks or credit checks that landlords are requiring. It could be that the folks we are trying to house get screened out of that process. Folks may not be interested in renting to this population. So, it's of course more complex than just a numbers game. The folks we are trying to house are going to have a harder time, even in a very healthy rental market.
And I would say too, especially in a university town and with the U of O student population, where we're sometimes hearing from our providers that they have households they're working with that are going up against students who have parents who are willing to pay the 3-time deposit, or obviously may not have the same background check. So that was one piece that popped in my head too when I was initially looking at this data. Is Corvallis is up there, but we're, as a university town, and with that kind of natural transition of a chunk of renters throughout the year, I do wonder how that plays an effect. And like Kate said, looking at the next quarter would be interesting to see what the comparison is.
Yeah, I could certainly see how the 3-bedroom statistic is really bad as well, because that's typically, in my mind, that's like a River Road Santa Clara home on Maxwell, that's some old couple owns, and I keep saying old, and I keep looking in the mirror and getting older, but that have just a single or maybe 1 or 2 of those things, and the maintenance on those and the cost of a bad tenant is such a risk and an aversion to try something this, even with assurances from agencies that say, they'll cover that. I can certainly see how that rental rate's way down below where it should be, just because of availability and fear and trust. So, yeah.
Turn it over to Maria to take over.
Well, Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Maria Cortez. I'm a Senior Program Services Coordinator with Lane County Human Services. And I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about the comments on MLK and then transition to talk a little bit about the Lazy Days project as well. So the comments on MLK, thank you. The comments on MLK is located on the Surbu campus next to Lane County Behavioral Health on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. It opened in February of 2021 with 51 studio apartments. Homes for Good is the owner and operator of the building. And more recently, they've also taken on the services more broadly to offer supports. The project was recently funded by OHCS to have more sustainable dollars. So they received, Homes for Good received $510,000 in FY25. The program consists of two different components. So there's the intensive supportive services, so those case management services, and then the long-term rent assistance. This project is also one of, it's part of the FUSE initiative, and so many of the residents are frequent users of our system. So jail, emergency department, inpatient services. So the Comments on MLK was developed really in order to fill a need in our community, really addressing the issue of chronic homelessness and also looking at those individuals in our community who we really found to be cycling through systems. So again, those high arrest rates, cycling through the BHU, emergency department, et cetera. So, for example, in the 6 months before housing, the average resident at the Comments on MLK spent over 6 days in jail, had more than 5 emergency department visits, and nearly 3 days in inpatient treatment. So in order to address this, we looked at the permanent supportive housing model, which is evidence-based and combines housing assistance and supportive services to assist households with at least one member having a disability to achieve housing stability. In 2018, the TAC report provided us recommendations, as well as the Poverty and Homelessness Board's strategic plan to increase our supply of permanent supportive housing locally. And so Homes for Good and Lane County partnered to develop the Comments on MLK, which is also our first project-based permanent supportive housing program.
Maria, excuse me, would you mind saying to the public what the TAC is, please?
Yeah, so the TAC report was written by the Technical Assistance Collaborative, who came to do a study here in Lane County to assess our overall need for services relating to homelessness and how to address homelessness. So they pulled together a report that addressed multiple factors such as coordinated entry, housing, shelter, so on and so forth.
Well done, thank you.
So this chart represents the number of calls for services at the Comments on MLK. So these are services to police, fire, ambulance, CAHOOTS. And as you can see, in 2021, we had a really high number of calls. But as time progressed, those calls have dropped significantly. And so I think this is really a testament to the robust services that are being provided on site at the Comments on MLK by Homes for Good. So in order to access the program, households must go through coordinated entry. And so the population that is served is individuals who are chronically homeless. So that's defined by having 12 months of consecutive homelessness or 4 episodes of homelessness within 3 years, combined with a diagnosed disability. So we're serving really those individuals with the highest vulnerabilities and highest systems utilization. And the referrals to the project are 50-50, so it's 50% coming from the top of the centralized waitlist, so those with the highest vulnerability scores, and the other 50% being referred from Fuse program providers. So program services at the Commons on MLK are robust, and there are 4 components. So there's the housing stabilization services, and this is really the piece that is focused on the eviction prevention, really helping individuals to overcome challenges and problems that might come up that may impact their living situation in any way. So the development of goals and plans to support, really 3 key pieces, right? So it's helping individuals to pay their rent on time, to be good neighbors, and to take care of their units. The other component is linkages to community-based resources. So this would be where the referrals are happening through case management, connections to programs like Lane County Behavioral Health, which is conveniently right next door. Also, linkages to a number of other services in the community that will help the individual just really have that wraparound support that they need. There's a great relationship happening between the leadership at the Commons on MLK and leadership at Senior and Disabled Services right now. So there's a lot of collaboration happening to help support individuals who have high needs around their activities of daily living. And really, again, just for that retention to help people be able to stay in their housing long-term. Tenant engagement is also another critical piece of the program services. So there is a tenant council on site, and this is tenant-led. It is supported by Homes for Good staff, but it gives the tenants an opportunity to really take leadership, provide input about their living situation and what they'd like to see in the program, what's working well, what's not working. And this has gone a long way. So if we think back to the slide on service calls, we can see that that reduced dramatically. And I believe pieces of the program like this help really develop a sense of culture and a more peaceful environment by working through these challenges, developing trust between residents and also trust between residents and staff that are working at the Commons on MLK. So resident services are another critical piece of the project, and that really focuses on a number of kind of like classes and activities that folks can get involved with. They have a really nice calendar that they post on in common areas, and they hand out to residents. They provide a lot of different creative incentives to really help encourage individuals to participate. And so a lot of this is life skills programming. I was there last week and I spent a little bit of time on site. And while I was there, they were running a gardening club, and so watering and planting. They were also engaging in a cooking class. So one of the things that they do is partner with Food for Lane County and their Extra Helpings program. And so they bring that program on site. Individuals are able to line up and get their nutrition needs met by accessing additional food to help them get through the month. And they don't stop there. So if whatever's left over, they actually kind of recycle, and they offer this cooking class where they're putting together creative meals using whatever's left over. So when I was there, they were doing banana bread.
Yes, so question, Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you. I fully understand, just got the word permanent and housing. So it's housing, it's not shelter. And so there's no time limit. People can stay there as long as they need to. But MLK Commons, the Nell, Keystone, Shorely, we also have people who move on for a positive. They've stabilized to a point where they're actually able to be successful in a place with less support. Are we able to keep track of folks in that instance, and at some point at a future presentation, maybe the entirety of our PSH program, not just the MLK Commons, hearing about some of those success stories and what people found helped them the most during their time living in permanent supportive housing that's allowed them to succeed in another model of housing after their time in PSH?
Absolutely, and and we could definitely provide more information on the move-on process, and that's what we refer to it as. And the Lane County works with Homes for Good to take referrals and process the referrals, and then so we have what's called a move-on matrix, and so the PSH providers can fill one of those out, and if folks are meeting kind of all of those pieces of the matrix, they can then kind of move on or put their hat in the ring to get on the list to be able to move on when a voucher opens up. Mm-hmm. We are running into some challenges as Homes for Good is seeing reduced funding for rental subsidies, and so those vouchers are decreasing, and so there's a priority for move-on folks, but it's still a waiting game.
Great, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Thanks. This is all pretty good news that you're delivering today. When we opened MLK Commons, it didn't open at a very good time, did it? Mm-hmm. It opened during COVID, and Shelter Care was managing the facility, and there was nobody to hire, so that it was really difficult. So if you look at the graph, 2021 looks horrible. Yeah. And so many people were ready to chuck it in at that point and say, well, permanent supportive housing clearly doesn't work. Well, we know, based upon data that we're keeping, that permanent supportive housing does work, and that people do move on onto different places, different types of housing. But it still comes down to exactly what we were talking about in the last meeting, is there are no places to move on to. So you give them a voucher, okay, you're off. Well, that's just the start of trying to find a place. So we don't need to talk any more about that. We're all deeply engaged in how do we address that situation. But, it's a time to call out Laurel Hill for the work that they've done, not just with the NEL, which they took over from the beginning, but when they assumed MLK Commons, that's what they do, and that's not what Shelter Care did. And as much as we all do love Shelter Care, Laurel Hill is really attuned to particularly behavioral health services. And I think, without going too deep into this, Maria, you're reporting really good news. Now, it's all very sobering because we're not even coming close to addressing the issue, nor will we until we have places to move people on to. But we are doing better than just about anybody else, I think, in the nation, right here in Lane County. And when we first engaged in FUSE, Frequent User System Engagement, it was a nice theory, and we thought it would work. Guess what you're reporting? It works. So thank you. It is good news.
Thank you, and that kind of brings me into my next slide, which is partnerships. And we couldn't do this, right, without all of these entities. So this is many of our key funders, HUD, OHCS, our CCOs, as well as Lane County. Kaiser Quantum is the on-site property management company that is contracted by Homes for Good. And then Laurel Hill, we partner with them, especially with the FUSE piece. So moving on to focus on some of the outcomes, I wanted to highlight a couple of things here. So 129 residents have exited homelessness into the Commons on MLK since 2021. And in this fiscal year, 2025, 94% of residents have remained in housing for 12 months or more. And I think this just ties back into the conversation around just those supports that are being offered. And given that this was a first of its kind project in our community, certainly there are some bumps in the road and some things to work through and work toward, but I think that this is part of that testament to showing what the project can really do and helping people to maintain housing long-term. So looking at income and disability, again, participants are all required to have a diagnosed disability in order to be able to enter the project, as well as that chronic homeless status. 33% of participants entering into housing increased their income. 97% of participants either increased or maintained their income. And the primary source, well, I shouldn't say primary, the main source of income for most participants is SSI and SSDI. And just kind of tying back into what Eve touched on earlier, if folks didn't have these long-term rental assistance opportunities, it would be incredibly difficult for them to find housing in the community on their own.
Sorry, Marie, just one more thing for the public. SSI is Social Security income and Social Security disability income?
Yes,
Okay.
thank
great.
you.
Just want to make sure the public knows that. Thank you.
And so this slide is representing the data that we recently were able to pull looking at the 6 months before the intervention of housing and really what that looked like in that first 6 months to year after housing. And so when it came to jail, emergency department visits, and inpatient treatment, we saw that drop pretty dramatically. So jail time dropped by over 60%, emergency room visits were cut in half, and inpatient days dropped by more than 60%. And so this slide is looking more at that kind of longevity over the course of the project. And so what we found is that people who've stayed housed longer are using services less. So the longer people stay housed, the fewer services they tend to use. So again, looking at jail use, having that dramatic drop, emergency room visits as well, and then inpatient stays a little bit more, fluctuated a little bit more, but overall, pretty big declines. So this slide looks at the cost savings. And what we found is that the average annual cost savings per resident in permanent supportive housing, and specifically the Commons on MLK, to be $46,586. So when you look at jail costs, it's about a $2,000 savings. For emergency department visits, about a $31,000 savings, and for inpatient treatment, about a $13,000 savings.
Is that cumulative annually or some other measure of time?
Yes, so this is the average. This was calculated by looking at the same metrics that we looked at, or the number of visits. So in the previous slide that I showed, the average number of jail visits per person, the average number of ED visits and inpatient savings, or inpatient treatment, apologies.
So it's 4 years cumulative
Yes.
savings.
The 176,000, so that 46,000 number is for a 1 year period.
It's a 1 year.
One year period.
So this is a dollar representation of the previous slide, basically. Previous slide is average number of visits to these various services,
Yes.
and this is what those visits would have cost if
Yes.
Per resident
per resident per year.
Yeah.
Yes. And this slide is just indicating so if you take that average per resident per year number and multiply it by 51, we see over $2 million saved annually, and over the course of 4 years, over $8 million saved just based on those services alone. So I wanted to just end this portion by sharing some excerpts from a recent interview with a long-term Commons on MLK resident. And what he said was that I was told about it, the Commons on MLK, through Laurel Hill. I guess because I used to go to jail so many times and I had been kind of sickly. And I had a lot of problems with me. Ever since I've been in MLK, I haven't gone to jail, which is one of my bonus points where I kind of like living here. It's just amazing not going to jail for a while. I felt safe, and I didn't have to live with anybody. So here, it is really nice because I have a place to call my house, my home. Feels good to be in charge of myself again. A lot of my goals I've achieved. Being here helped me with my goals, my Social Security. Yeah, I had a really hard time in my life doing that. And so now I kind of feel like I graduated there. So now I have my own money. So now I'm going to kind of transition into talking a little bit about Lazy Days. And so for those of you who may not know, Lazy Days was a mobile home park in Blue River before the 2020 Holiday Farm fire, and unfortunately was completely destroyed in that fire. And so through disaster recovery efforts at the state as well as at the local level, it was decided that Homes for Good would take on the development of a new Lazy Days project. And so Homes for Good partnered with Lane County to provide the screening of applicants. So that's Lane County's role, is really just doing that applicant processing and housing navigation. So the project is currently open and serving families and single adults. Right now there are 7 units that are occupied, and we have another 3 individuals who are very close to lease up, and then a handful of others who are working through just getting their documentation in order. And all of that being said, there are still some units that will be available, and so we are currently recruiting for additional residents. And I'll touch on the eligibility criteria for this, which is a little bit, it's not at this point in time super open, and so that's why the project is not yet completely filled, but we are going to get there. So there are 30 total units. 20 of them are 2-bedroom modular homes, and the other 10 are 1-bedroom park model units. So I thought I would just give you a glimpse at the eligibility criteria. So this project was very specifically focused on helping to rehouse former Lazy Days residents. And so we've had some success with that, and we do have a handful of families that have moved in who formerly lived at Lazy Days. The other priority groups, priority 2, 3, and 4, are really focused on folks who owned homes in the community or rented in the community that was impacted by the fire and had either destruction or damage to their home. And then the final priority group 5 is actually brand new. We just got word from the state that they have broadened the criteria for eligibility to renters who lived in Lane County at the time of the 2020 Labor Day fires who were impacted by the destabilization of the affordable rental housing market. So that's pretty broad and can be probably defined pretty loosely, and so it will open the opportunity up to a much broader group. That being said, we do have to get official approval from the state to be able to move forward with this priority group, so we have submitted a request to the state, and so we're just waiting to hear back, and we should be able to begin publicizing opening that up soon. And with that being said, I don't have anything else, so open it up for questions.
Great, very good, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? Yes, Commissioner Book.
Thank you. I'll just add my praise to the work at MLK Commons. I think we've learned a lot of lessons in that new kind of design. Largely, we'd probably build the building a little bit differently. That structure and floor plan would probably change. In future, of the services wrapped with housing for frequent users of the system is proving to be largely successful, which is wonderful news, especially for those that were very skeptical at first, especially when you had all those calls and there were damage to the building and you're wondering, geez, is this really worth it? Is this really worth our investment? Should we be putting our money elsewhere in other different program types? But overall, over time, clearly the data is suggesting and proving out to show that this concept really works. Now, federal capital investment for more buildings like this is probably not in our immediate horizon. So ensuring that this one remains successful, I think, should be one of our top priorities. And then waiting for another opportunity where we can expand that kind of a service with the lessons that we've learned. So I'm really excited to know that we have saved $8 million in other public services, not just county-related services, but public safety services, other government-related services, healthcare costs, et cetera, for folks, and they're actually living better lives. Hopefully that translates into them being healthier, making better choices for themselves and the people around them, and feeling like they're really a part of our community, which they are, and now maybe feel that inside more than they were able to do that when they were on the street. For Lazy Days, I'm actually excited by priority number 5. I've expressed my feelings pretty consistently that the criteria has needed to be expanded. It's been nearly 5 years since the fire. People are either interested that have been affected now or they have moved on. So it is time to fill those units. The longer they stay vacant, like any house that's laid vacant for a long period of time, it's hard on a building to remain vacant. And the community needs the folks back. They really welcome folks from other fire-affected communities. We've already expanded that eligible criteria in the past. And that should remain a priority level in the future. But I do get emails or calls from folks saying, why hasn't Lane County approved these folks yet? They seem like they're ready and eligible. We need to get these folks in. And so I would like to see that movement happen quicker, but I know we do have constraints because of the regulations by Oregon Housing and Community Services Disaster Recovery Division, not the main agency, but the Disaster Recovery Division specifically. But I would like to see all those units filled by the end of the year. They need to be filled. We have people who can easily fill those units, knowing that we have continual priority levels of people that were in fire-affected communities in the past. I think as long as we keep that priority level, and even if people are coming from other areas, we have fulfilled the commitment to the community, and we have met all the requirements of the disaster recovery dollars. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thank you. Well stated. I have a couple of questions too, and along the lines with what Commissioner Buck said about if we're gonna have any federal money where we're gonna build another building like that. I remember that building cost $14 million to build. We did have a site at MLK earmarked for the stabilization center. That's now not gonna happen. So we do have a site if we decide to go forward, I would assume. You did mention, though, that was interesting that you wouldn't design the building as we designed it before. And I remember back in '23, when you gave your report on the MLK Commons, when we were still going through a lot of difficulties, you were saying that there was about $1.2 million in damages a year. Where's that graph at this point now? Now that everything else is maybe successfully going in the right direction, is that one going also in similar directions?
Yeah, I don't know if you have the specific data. I know they've reached what's called stabilization, if you wanted to touch on that at all.
So we are seeing the overall damage costs be reduced significantly, really because people are stabilizing and their quality of life is increasing. The other positive thing is that there have been a number of initiatives that the state has established in order to help pay for those damage mitigation costs as well. And it's something that has been a reality for housing authorities and other PSH providers across the state, and it's a reality across the nation. But we are seeing the overall cost related to damage be decreased, and it also helps in that Homes for Good, which was the developer of the property, that they are also managing the operations, and so I know they've put some initiatives in place to also mitigate the overall damage as well, because it comes out of their pockets.
Yeah, nobody runs the building like the owners do. But I'm not saying to bring that to be critical, but also just as a educational tool for those people who have properties that we want to partner with, to saying, hey, we've got these lessons in place now, we've mitigated damages by doing this much. So it'd be really good in my mind to see where those damages are, to see what the percentage of the drop was, just so if we're going to sell that to other landlords in the area, that, hey, this is what we've learned and this is how we're doing on our damages, and we're doing a good job. I think that would help build some trust in the community. Commissioner Farr.
Thanks. And, I think the trend is definitely upward from 2021. I mean, not definitely. I mean, it's remarkably startlingly upward from 2021. But interestingly, in that we started that right at exactly, we couldn't pick a more perfect storm. And we filled all 51 units within the snap of a finger, instead of gradually moving people in. We did a lot of things incorrectly during that we learned from. There were some things we couldn't help, but some things that we could have done a little bit differently. But what's really cool, I think, is to compare to the opening of MLK Commons and the curve of tenancy there to the Nell, operated by Homes for Good, built by Homes for Good.
And so operated by Laurel Hill.
Operated by Laurel Hill, but I mean built by Homes for Good and developed by Homes for Good with a different model and a different building concept. So we learned from it. And the Nell, I think you probably don't have any numbers on the Nell at this point in time, but the Nell is maybe you do. But the Nell has demonstratedly been successful almost right from day one. So we are better at it. We have learned from it, and we do need more of it. That's my conclusion.
Yeah. Vice Chair.
Yeah, I would like to go back to the RFP process that James was speaking about earlier. And we could take some of this offline too, but I'd like to see that RFP and go over it. And just as I was sitting there thinking, do we need the same RFP for somebody centered in Eugene as we do somebody centered in Florence or Cottage Grove? I just did a quick measurement. I mean, SOS is, they're the hub there, and they cover almost 500 square miles. I mean, that's a different nonprofit. So I would like to kind of go over those things and make sure that we are being as equitable as we can to any of our rural nonprofits, because that's not an easy gig. Yeah, and they're oftentimes on their own. So that'd be, maybe you and I can cover that later.
And I think this is so hard when we have scarcity of resources, because of course what we hear from the metro area is we have the highest needs folks in the metro area. We have more quality of life concerns in terms of our residents not only the people who are unhoused, but the people around them, business owners, and damages and crime and that sort of thing. And so we get also a lot of pressure from the metro areas. Why are you funding so much in rural areas, right? Because the crux of the problem is in the metro area. And the reality is that there's no right answer. The right answer is that we have enough resources to serve everyone in our community. And when we have to divide it up, I think there will, no matter how we do it, someone will feel that we made the wrong choice in how to do that. So I think it's just important to voice the different perspectives that are at the table, and it's important to look and make sure that we have access to services within all of the geographical areas of our community.
I will share that community services in South Lane is a similar sentiment. And the impact to communities is all relative, right? So the rural areas have impacts that are similar to the metro areas. It's just a difference of sheer number of people that are being served.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Is it per capita, percentage? I mean, define the problem. If you speak to some of our rural communities, and I mean, Florence ebbs and flows by 500 depending on the weather. That's a big number for them. I mean, out of a community of, and that's aside from their base number. I mean, that's just what goes up and down. And so for them to have the funding to take that on when it comes is a big deal.
Commissioner Barr.
And I'll talk about a case in point specifically in Florence. We have archaic state land use laws. We have a property in Florence, and Commissioner Buck and I hear about this all the time, that Homes for Good is ready to build on. But the state won't allow it because the zoning's not right. And it's a perfect location. Every element of it is perfect. A few steps from a restaurant, from a Safeway store and other amenities on the transportation corridor, but we can't build there. And we could have built there 2 years ago, but because we have stupidly outdated state rules on land use, and we experience it here in Lane County as well as the communities like Florence. We can't do the things that we have the resources, we have the money, we have the planning and everything, but the state says no. So the legislature, and you talk about it being Multnomah County centered, it is, has been always, was when I was there, is now. Everything revolves around what's right for the Tri-County area, and not what's right for the other 95% of Oregon. That is a flag we need to raise up the pole as to how do we get the legislature and how do we get the people of Oregon to understand that what we passed in Senate Bill 100 does not work in 2025.
All right, anything else to add? James, Maria, Kate, Director Gray, thank you so much for your presentation. Very thoughtful and very insightful. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Is that right on time?
Yeah, first time we've been on time today.
Come on. As we move along on our agenda, we come to our commissioner's business. I'm just going to go ahead and group A, B, and C announcements, comments, remonstrance, and committee reports into one fell swoop. Whoever wants to take a shot at it, go ahead. Yes, go ahead, Commissioner, Street, please.
Thanks. Did you say all of them, including
Sure.
assignment requests? Okay.
Oh, no assignment request, sorry.
No assignment.
A through C.
A, B. Easy as one, 2, 3. Well, just happy Pride, everyone. We didn't meet last week, but it is June. It is Pride Month. And I found this great quote from Jodie Foster. Who doesn't love Jodie Foster? So I just wanted to read. She's awesome. But she says, being gay is like being left-handed. Some people are, most people aren't, and nobody really knows exactly why. It's not right or wrong, it's just one of the many natural ways to be. The world works best when everyone gets to live as they truly are. So if you ever feel out of place, remember, you're not broken, you're just beautifully different, and that's something the world needs.
That's good.
Yeah, I love that. And this year, the Pride celebration is at the Lane Event Center for the first time. So I'll remind us in 2 weeks when we're up again. We're down next week, but it's usually been in Alton Baker, but it's going to be a little indoor-outdoor event at our very own Lane Event Center, and it's going to be, as it always is, a really wonderful, celebratory, inclusive, and more important this year than ever, opportunity to be in community. So just encourage everyone to consider attending.
Good, thanks for sharing. Commissioner Buck?
I'll just note that wildfire season has begun. Well, almost a month earlier than last year. I've already had alerts come on my phone, even though they've been small and taken care of very quickly. But briefings with congressional staff and legislators are talking about it. They've all begun. People are gearing up, and at OEM, where I'm part of an advisory group, you know, a lot of their good work that they do kind of has to pause for wildfire season. The outlook is pretty similar to last year, which, as we remember, in the county, we had 3 conflagrations, like 3 groupings of individual fires, and it was the most, like numerically speaking, at one time that we've ever seen. So it's a time just to remind the community of preparing for wildfire season, being 2 weeks ready, getting their house in order, getting their yards in order, and helping their neighbors who maybe aren't capable of doing that themselves. And for us to really gear up to what that means for us and our emergency management team, and supporting that team as much as we can, because I feel like we could have another busy year.
Indeed. Commissioner Farr?
Well, a lot of things to talk about, but I'd like to point out work that's been done by Pauline and by Marcus VR. Currently, we're working through the issue on aid and assist, which is how funds are prioritized for mental health services in the state hospital. And we're at a point right now where the counties are reluctant. Is that a good word? No, we're not going to sign. Beyond was higher than reluctant.
Well beyond.
Right, was higher than reluctant to sign the contract with OHA because they're not. OHA has not been exhibiting a desire to coordinate with counties regarding how the funds are spent. There's a lot that goes into that, and we had a lot of meetings last week, but the thing, so I'm not going to go into details about it. I've got notes after notes and quotes that would turn some OHA faces quite red if they knew what they'd actually said. But that being said, we have a superstar right here at Lane County, and that is Marcus Vihar, who is just really, he's stepped up as a leader in the state as far as working through the issues around the CFAA grant. And that's all I'll say right now is that I'm really proud. When I'm sitting in a room and he's talking, I'm just proud. I'm with him, is what I say. And it's a really powerful place to be. And not to mention Dr. Gishohi, who is there and present, and because she has such a depth, such a breadth of experience with the state hospital and with mental health services, she is emerged as a leader also. And I think if we get it fixed, the fix is going to start right here in Lane County. So that seems a little bit cryptic, but that's all I'm going to say about that.
More on that to come later this month.
More, yes, yeah, probably later this day, Rob. I think,
yeah, you're right.
And Eve has a lot that you could add on that too. I think we're going to be meeting with the governor later this week to try and get the governor's intercession. I don't know what the chances of that are, but anyway, that's I get to do what people tell me to do on this one. It's really a wonderful place to be. And then just mention that not everybody has had a chance to work with Lucy Zamorelli, but Lucy retired last week. Lucy was the main staff person for the last several years for what did you say? Oh, for the Mental Health Advisory Committee and others. And she really has provided a lot of leadership. We're going to miss her tremendously. And Lucy, if you're listening, thank you. We're in pretty good shape because Brittany DeLisi is taking over many of the duties, and Brittany brings a great deal of energy to the work and a great deal of insight. So we're not dropping off, but we are going to miss Lucy.
Good.
You good? I got just a couple things, just one thing. Next week is our annual Association of Oregon California Counties meeting. There's been a lot of timber news going on. I was in almost a 5-hour meeting on Friday with the Oregon Department of Forestry. New forest management plans, they're seeing the need to manage the forest. The federal government's obviously putting forth some executive orders for us to go in there and manage our forests. And so there's hope in there that we can get back in and at least fire mitigate. There's 4 plans that they put forth. One was, well, there's basically 2 that were kind of an even board feet per year kind of approach where they'd be hovering around 185 million board feet a year, and the other one was to try to get on it fairly aggressively now and then let it flatten out a little bit, and the other one was to go super aggressive and then just see where it goes. So obviously in a plan you have 4, you always have one you just automatically throw out because it sounds ridiculous, and that was number 4, which was the one that starts really aggressive because ODF doesn't have staff for that and all that. But the Plan 3 sounded pretty good because it gets us into the forest, it gets us managing our forest, it gets us mitigating some of the forest dangers that we've just talked about with Commissioner Buck and the wildfire issues. And it also gets some degree of revenue back in the counties. Now the caveat with all that is that the federal government is now toying with the percentages of the receipts that used to come back with the counties. So the counties typically with the ONC lands was getting 50-50, and then they switched to 75-25. Now there's sometimes not talk of any receipts coming to the county. So obviously we're reloading our guns and figuring out what we're going to do with that to make sure that the counties get their fair due from the revenues that come from the lands that we can't collect taxes on. So that's where we're at. So that's next Friday. We're going to have that meeting, so I'm hoping that goes well and we have a good game plan. All right. Any future board assignments we should be aware of people want to make? Yes, Commissioner Trigger.
Yeah. I mentioned this morning some, some frustration of really missing the opportunity to respond when community comes to us in public comment with very specific requests or questions or an evident lack of understanding about what a process is around something that we're engaged in or something about county operations. So I'd like to ask if there are head nods to have the agenda team kind of wrestle with and reconsider the fact that we have removed the long-standing tradition of having commissioner comments and remonstrance immediately following public comment, and to bring back a report to us about what, justification in thinking about that, or some alternative way that at the very least, administrator can respond when there are things like what happened this morning where there's clearly a bit of an information vacuum for the public, so that we can respond in the moment when people are actually present and in the room and have them get the information that they're seeking in real time.
Did you want to respond to that, Council?
Oh, I don't know, respond. I just know how that's kind of handled in other counties that don't have what we used to have, the remonstrance section, which is usually typically some commissioner says, can I respond to that? Or can I have staff respond to that? Or Mr. Mogarhesky or Ms. Brovette, would you like to respond to that? Or could you respond to that with the chair's permission? Then we just kind of have always done it on the fly that way. It's not called out on the agenda, but when it's obvious that, boy, we ought to, call Alana up here and have her tell what's going on, then we just pause and do it. That's kind of the way it's always been handled in the other counties I've worked at. But it's not necessarily an agenda item, it's just subject to, the chair just sees it, or somebody else calls it to the chair's attention, and we just do it, if that makes sense.
At the least, for me, for the purposes of why I'm making this an assignment, which maybe is overly formal, because we could just, if there's head nods that we could at least do that, because then we did have Alana come up, but it was after the fact and people had left the room. Or similarly with, the person asking about the navigation center, just to be able to flag for them right then and there, be responsive in the moment. We have a work session scheduled on less than such a date. It just seems like such a missed opportunity that we've sort of
I can say
unnecessarily stifled ourselves, I think, from being responsive in that way.
I see exactly what you're saying. I think I'll take on myself kind of being aware of that. But I think the other problem with today, and it's not the board's fault, is we had those deadlines, we had those times, certain things that were pressuring us. So even if, I don't know, I guess we have, it would have been logical, quite frankly, to pull Alana up and have her do then, but then that would have consumed 10 minutes. And it's like, it's such a challenge sometimes to try to figure out timing. but I hear you, Commissioner. I do. I felt that need there right then as well. Like, oh, but wait, we've actually done all of this stuff, and but yeah, 2020 hindsight.
Commissioner Clark.
I'm not going to talk much about this, but there are benefits to not having a response, and a couple of them being that you don't have to select which one of the testimonies you respond to, and if you respond to one, you don't respond to another. Are you stepping on other people's toes, or because it just happens to be the one thing that you want to respond to? And I worry that some people who testify regularly get ignored regularly, like David Eigel is there all the time. Nobody ever responds to him, ever did respond to him, nor, I don't know what the reasoning is on that, because nobody has a particular interest. But if a particular commissioner has an interest in what people are talking about, or they want to say, aha, I believe the same thing you believe, it becomes, the danger is it becomes a little bit iffy as to how you respond. You may say things that sound like a commitment, for instance. And I think, Rob, you and I talked about that a little bit. And, the other thing that I like about not having remonstrances is the time element, because it did stretch on for quite some time. And for me personally, I long to respond. Oh, gosh, I'm faunching at the bit to say something about it, but it becomes a matter of who do I grace with my response, and who do I ignore? And are we doing a service or a disservice to the people we respond to, or a disservice to the people we don't respond to? It becomes discretionary.
Commissioner Book.
I think it makes sense to be able to have at the very least, have staff address any particular, reoccurring theme that's coming up, that there's actually some clarification that can be done on the spot. There's value in that. I understand, for a personal commissioner response period, that there's a benefit to having a moment to think about what you want to say before you're on the spot to say it. Everybody deserves to have a little time to ruminate on what comments are being said, and then to comment at an appropriate time. But I think the default to not comment at all to anybody, there's pitfalls to that as well. So I think there's opportunity to have some kind of balance in a response that's responsible, and also appropriate, and then gives us the time to think about what we would want to say at some future time, some future date. And enough time for that to happen in the morning. And there's always the issue of not knowing how many people are actually going to come to public comment. But if they took the time out of their day to come to us, to speak to their elected representatives in person, I think we have a responsibility or duty to have some kind of moderated response to important subjects that pop up that are relevant to us today.
Esther.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you went first, because I second all of that, and I would even like to add that, well, especially reiterate the time to think about it, so you're not reactionary, or because I think when you do respond, it also elevates the tension in the room when there's certain responses, or something doesn't come across right to this person, and that's not how it was intended. Today was a perfect example. If we could have coordinated between the chair and, say, our county administrator, I don't know if you did, but I was texting them, can we get Alana up here for your county administration part? Because I think it would have been great to have Alana come out and just say, this is what we've done, and this is what we've done for years, or I don't know if that's something that the chair could coordinate. But yeah, I could see room for improvement in that process.
Well, in response to that too, in my mind, the reason that probably wasn't top of my radar was I felt like we were pretty clear with the public of what the parameters were in the last meeting, what we were gonna do. That we were gonna do this was the time zone, we explained it, if possible, and we wanted to, on that next day, we would have a swearing ceremony. So in my mind, that was already put out there in front of the public. And I want to say this as really delicately as I can, because the reason that the reason I think the board has been more civil to one another since I've taken over is because we have put this at the end of the meeting. There's a certain degree in my mind I don't know, there's just comments that were made that in the moment there was some emotion, and that I think we could be a little bit better thoughtful about what we say if we had a little more time to do that. So that's the main reason. And the other thing is that, and Council Bovet and I spoke about this early on as well, is that we are the only county that does remonstrance after public comment. No other county does that. And there's probably reasons why. And so one of the reasons why we looked at was because it returned some degree of civility to the meeting. So to us, that's what we did. And I agree with there's certain parts that we should be looking at if we need to explain those more in depth with the people who come to the meetings. We should do that. And at the same time, there's also a time commitment we have to think about too. So today was one of those days where we didn't have a lot of time to. We wanted to give everyone a time to have public comments, and we had to shrink that down to a minute and a half, and we still maintained to get ourselves out of here at a decent time before we needed to. So those are just some of my thoughts. I'm happy to talk offline with anyone who wants to talk about that in more depth. And at this point, I would support maybe looking at some items with Mr. Mokryski now that we're more sensitive to it about things that we may need to bring forward after public comments, but I would support keeping things as they are.
Well, I guess, it's supposed to be an assignment, but I guess I appreciate what Council Bovet offered. It has felt very much like a chilling and like no one is allowed to speak. And so if the chair in particular, since you are running the meetings, could allow and trust your colleagues that if on the heels of public comment, someone asks to get in the queue, it's to do something like an invite county council or the administrator or somebody to say, is there a staff member available to respond? We heard a lot of comment about X, or can someone clarify that such and such is scheduled? But I have felt very much like even raising a hand is going to be frowned upon if it's not in response to an agenda item, that we've swung too far the other way. So I can appreciate we don't want to free for all, anybody can say anything, respond to whoever or no one in public comment, but I would like to ask the chair, my intent behind this assignment was for the agenda team, our administrator, county council, to think about how we might be able to create a little bit of space so that when in particular there are matters of county operations or policy or practice raised in public comment, that we could be more responsive in real time.
And to that, we had a work session scheduled with Mr. Bovet on the structure of the agenda that we did over a month ago that was going to address this very item. So I'm not sure that this particular board assignment is added to that or separate.
It can either be a part of it or it can be separate. But I think it's more, to me, that other assignment's bigger and global and covers a lot of things. This is more kind of immediate to address what even to me and to Commissioner Seneca was kind of clear that, boy, it would have been nice to kind of yard Lana up here and have a mechanism to do that. And I guess I'd ask the board to let Steve and I stew on that and talk to the chair and vice chair.
That was the assignment.
Yeah, I'm good with that assignment.
Amenable
if you
to that
are.
assignment, go forth, so assigned.
Well, I'm cool with that. I spent 10 years as a Eugene City Councilor, and over again, the mayor would say the council does not respond to public comment. Over and over again, and as Eugene City Council, for what it's worth, the robustness of the public comment over the last couple of years has been the norm forever at the Eugene City Council meetings. We had one public hearing, a public testimony period that the sun came up before it ended. They've limited the time on that since then, but that being said, that's the way the city council was. I don't know what they do today. That was 13 years ago, but I was accustomed to not responding. But there's a great deal of satisfaction in being able to respond, particularly if somebody accuses you of something that you didn't do, which does happen.
So it looks like we have head nods, sufficient to investigate that.
Thank
Put
you.
that forward. Anybody else? All right, Mr. McCoy, I see when you get done writing your notes, we can have a review of the assignment, sir, if you would.
Well, I just had that one. Commissioner Trieger's requested, what I heard was have county council and county administrator work with the agenda team to identify the right way to handle any appropriate responses for follow-up to public comment on the agenda.
From staff when it's called for under the specific, like.
I was trying to keep it shorter than that.
I know.
Like paragraphs of it.
Well, you and I know what this is.
Yes. Have you seen Rob's? Good luck, Jessica. I'll say good luck, Jessica, to figuring out that one.
Fair enough. All right, good, thank you.
Link to video of assignment is what she'll do.
If there's any other business, good for the order here. If not, I will, before I recess, I want to read us into our next two executive sessions that we have this afternoon. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in two executive sessions. The first session will take place immediately following the recess of this meeting. It is to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection and to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. The session is held ORS 192.6602F and ORS 192.6602H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. The second executive session will take place immediately following the conclusion of the first session. It is to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed, and is held in pursuant to ORS 192.6602H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for those purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff will be allowed to attend the executive sessions, and all other members of the audience are precluded from attending. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive sessions except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. Members of the news media are not allowed to tape, video record, or otherwise record an executive session, and verbatim notes are prohibited, and no decision may be made in an executive session. We return to public session tomorrow, June 11th, 9 a.m. at Harris Hall. We are recessed.